Hello, everybody. Happy Webinar Wednesday. Carly Euler is in the house. Carly, hello.
Hey, everybody. Excited to be here.
I am so happy to see you. Carly and I were at AFP Icon together. We were both at AFP Icon and saw each other together there. And it was such a pleasure chatting and spending time with you and your team, Carly. I know you're fabulous. Now I know your entire team is fabulous, even though I knew it already. But I know that you had lots of lovely conversations with people that were visiting the exhibiting floor. And I just really appreciate you coming on this webinar and also being a friend to Auctria because
I think, we've known each other for a time now. So it's been really great.
Awesome. So the reason that we invited MemoryFox and Carly here is because we know that fundraising is about raising money and raising awareness for your cause. I've said it before. And Carly is here to help you tell all those great stories, both ethically and authentically through MemoryFox. MemoryFox brings your mission to life with those powerful stories collected directly from your community. And sharing those during your fundraising efforts is incredibly important. Carly, on the other hand, is the director of marketing over there at MemoryFox, and she does an amazing job in telling stories. She's a creative thinker and making an impact in the nonprofit community. So, Carly, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
In the chat, I'd love for everybody to drop in there where you're tuning in from geographically, what kind of organization you're supporting. Lots of times friends find friends in our chats. And I know Carly's always talking to all sorts of organizations, and that kind of helps us tweak some of the conversations that we're having here so that it's aimed directly to you guys that are actually here in the webinar live. So that we can answer your questions appropriately as we move along. You will get a replay to the slides. You will get some videos to go along with it and some follow-up emails so that you have all the information so that it's a comprehensive experience that you have here. So we've got YMCA in Newton, New Hampshire, Zonta 501, Better Build a World for Women and Girls, hallelujah. Becca from Rochester, Elder Network, Sioux Falls Private School, Habitat for Humanity, love Habitat for Humanities. Hello from San Francisco, Private School, hello. Habitat for Humanity, oh, are they both in the same? Oh no, they're in different locations. Burlington, Vermont, Kids Safe Collaborative, Child Welfare, St. Paul. Go ahead and continue to drop your information in there. Carly, I am going to give you the keys. I think you have your screen share ready to...
Yes. Let me get you set up right here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, how does that look?
Looks perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, great. So, I'm so excited to be here. I have done a few presentations with Auctria before, but I have not done one just about ethical storytelling before. So I'm really excited to dig into this really important topic because, like Lori said, we talk about storytelling all the time. We talk about collecting stories, sharing stories. We have all these fun strategies, but then, a lot of times we get asked questions like, well, what am I supposed to do if the people that I serve have really sensitive stories that they might not want to share? How do I collect those? How do I share those ethically? So what we have done here and what I'm going to talk to you about today is all the strategies that you can start using at your nonprofit to better tell the stories you already have, but also to just do your process, maybe make your process a little bit more ethical, like one step at a time. So whether you have started ethical storytelling at all, or maybe you're brand new to this, maybe you are a few steps in, this webinar, hopefully you will find something that you can take away. Right up front, I want to say this is a super dense presentation, so feel free to screenshot. Definitely look at the slides later. There is a lot that I'm going to throw at you, and that's because there's so much good information. So I will hop right in. Great. So Lori did introduce me already. I'm the marketing director here at MemoryFox. I have worked at nonprofits for many years before this. Some of the great nonprofits that I got to work for or volunteer for include the Breast Cancer Coalition, Coda Support Foundation, the Wiley Network, Kenya Lacrosse Association, and the BOMA Project. So a lot of different missions doing a lot of different really great work. So you might be wondering, okay, if MemoryFox is a tech platform, well, why are they even thinking about ethical storytelling? What do they even have to say about it? So let me give you a quick background. Back in 2023, as part of our education initiative, we actually put together a panel of 4 leading experts in the ethical storytelling space. So people already doing great work about this. And we thought, we got a lot of questions from our own customers. We thought what we'd do is we'll put everyone on a panel. We'll ask them the questions that we get asked, and then we'll know everything, right? It'll be that simple. We will know all the answers. We'll be done learning about ethical storytelling. We'll simply know everything. But what we really didn't see coming is when we put together this panel, we ended up having 400 people register for it. And that meant that 150 people submitted questions about ethical storytelling. So those were 150 very different questions about this massive topic. Basically, what we quickly realized is that we needed to find a way to continue the conversation, because with any panel, you usually get to 8, 10 questions at the most. We certainly weren't going to get to 150. So what we did was we decided to create the first ethical storytelling report back in 2023, and now we have the 2024 version out as well. So we kind of took matters into our own hands. We took all those questions and we posed them to people in the space that are already doing this work, including nonprofit professionals, consultants, thought leaders, and our own MemoryFox team. If you haven't gotten a copy of the report yet, you can scan this, or I'll drop the link in the chat. But basically, or at the end of this, I will. But basically, if you haven't gotten your report, it's a free download. We definitely just want it out for anyone to cover. But really, kind of the big topics that it talks about are ethical story collection, trauma-informed interviews, stereotype stories, consent, and privacy. And like I said, this is advice that is compiled from 30 experts. Before I share their advice, of course, I do want to give them their due diligence, their shout outs. I mean, this list is a lot of really incredible people in the nonprofit space. You've probably seen a lot of these names floating around at different webinars and panels, but some really standouts like Maria Bryan. She does a whole trauma-informed storytelling certification program. If you're interested in learning more about the specifics of interviewing in a trauma-informed way, that's something that she specializes in. Diana Farias Heinrich, she is a really incredible consultant that specifically helps nonprofits set up their informed consent model. So if that's something you're looking to improve, you can hit her up. A lot of really great names here. And then, like I said, we have some nonprofit professionals as well as our MemoryFox team featured in the report. And then probably the most interesting thing about the report, the new 2024 report, is that we actually had 5 nonprofits that submitted themselves as ethical storytelling case studies. So they actually said, hey, this was a problem we had. This was our solution that we had. This was the outcome. I'm going to talk about one of those case studies today, but if you want to learn about the rest, definitely download the report. Okay, speaking of what I'm going to talk about today, the first thing I want to cover is kind of the state of the sector. So we have this really robust survey that we asked people to answer, and I want to share some of the most interesting results that we uncovered. Next, I want to talk about some ethical story collection considerations, and then followed by ethical story sharing. Next, I want to talk about consent, which is a really big topic, which really falls into kind of every category, but I tried to just do a quick summary for you today. Like I said, then I'm going to talk about the ethical storytelling case study. We're going to touch also on anonymous storytelling. So if you really cannot share the faces or the voices of the people you serve, there are some strategies for that. And then, of course, some key takeaways. So with all that in mind, let's hop right in to the state of the sector. All right, so I'm going to share some of our survey results. I first want to let you know what you're going to see on these charts. You're going to see some orange lines, which indicate the 2023 survey results, and the purple lines indicate the 2024 survey results. You can actually see how they compare year over year. The first question we asked people was how important, kind of an overview, right? How important is ethical storytelling to you? So when you look at this chart here, we are obviously super proud to report that every single person surveyed rated ethical storytelling as at least a 3, which is a little important, or greater. In fact, the vast majority, over 80%, 2 years in a row, view ethical storytelling as extremely important. So this is probably exactly what we expected to see, right? I mean, it would feel a little odd if people said that they didn't think it was important at all, right? So this is basically what we expected to see here. But we did want to say that we recognize that just because someone has a personal individual belief about ethical storytelling, that it might not reflect how they feel their organization feels about ethical storytelling. So we took it the next step and we said, how does your organization feel about ethical storytelling in terms of importance? And you can see that these charts do skew in the same direction. So that's good news. But you can see that the chart that here on the right does skew a little lower, right? So 72% reported that they believe that their organization finds it extremely important, while 20% find it very important. So definitely a big decrease there. And unlike the chart on the left, we also see that some respondents did say that they felt ethical storytelling was actually not at all important to their organization. So definitely a disconnect sometimes between the individual working at a nonprofit and the actual organization. And you can raise your hand and let me know in the chat if you think that applies to you. I won't tell anybody. I certainly won't tell your organization, but if you feel like it's maybe more important to you, you're in the right space, and I'm going to help you try to bring that importance back to your whole organization as well. All right, the next thing that we wanted to chat, or that we wanted to figure out, has to do with consent. And that is, because one thing here at MemoryFox that we know is that the most important part of story collection is consent. And the really cool thing is that we found that nonprofits believe that too. So 81% find it extremely important, 14% find it a little important. But again, just because you believe that consent is extremely important, we know that doesn't necessarily mean you have a great system in place for collecting consent. So we wanted to ask. We said here, on a scale of 1 to 5, I feel my organization has a solid system in place when it comes to collecting consent for stories. And you can see that these charts are vastly different, right? So even though the vast majority said it's extremely important, we actually only found that 24% believe that they currently have a great system in place to do so. So there's a big disconnect here, right? So that's something that we obviously want to focus on. When you look at the second chart here, we actually found that respondents were most likely to answer that they agree that they have maybe an okay system in place. So that's good news. But on the other hand, we did see that 6% actually strongly disagree. I think for me, though, if I'm looking at maybe the most interesting thing to take from these two charts, it's actually that the data didn't really change from year to year. So we see pretty much the same outcomes from 2023 and 2024 survey. As someone who has been, thinking a lot about these topics really pretty much every day, I was a little shocked to see that there wasn't a big improvement or any improvement from 2023 to 2024, but I'm optimistic that after teaching this webinar a few more times, we might see those numbers increase for 2025. Okay, now this is where we can all start dropping our own experiences in the chat. One thing that I did add to this year's survey was this open-ended question where I said, what steps does your organization currently take to ensure stories are collected and shared ethically? I read through all the responses. I did not use AI. I read through them myself, and I categorized them to really get a feel of what I felt the submission meant. So then when I did that, I dropped them into this great word cloud, and obviously the biggest ones were things people were most likely to say. So I'm happy to report that a lot of people, 58 people actually, that responded to this question, they said that they currently collect consent. So that's a really great first step. So if you already collect consent, or if you're already doing any of these, let me know in the chat what you're already doing in terms of ethical storytelling, whether it's one little thing or many things. I'd love to hear it. Some other things that stand out here on this chart include removing identifying information. This is a common thing that people do, especially when they are worried about anonymous storytelling and keeping their storytellers, you know, kind of detached from their own stories. Sometimes we commit to removing identifying information. So we see that that's a pretty common practice, as well as obtaining final story consent. So that's after you write your story or after you create your video, going back to that storyteller and saying, hey, are you okay with how this edit came out, and do you still approve it? So really good stuff that we saw, a lot of really nice things that people are currently doing. As you imagine, I then asked on the flip side, what are the biggest challenges that your organization is facing in adhering to ethical storytelling practices? So again, if you're currently feeling like you're having challenges with ethical storytelling, go ahead and drop those in the chat. And then when I asked people this question, we actually saw, you know, you can see clearly here that there's no one word that is really sticking out, right? There is a lot of nuance when it comes to people having challenges with ethical storytelling. Kind of the biggest, most reported ones did end up being a lack of education. So that would mean just that people don't necessarily understand what ethical storytelling might look like, and therefore they feel like they're not doing it, which makes sense, right? Another one would be a lack of training. So maybe they do kind of understand ethical storytelling, but they're not really sure what to do, what first steps to do. So they kind of feel like they are not going to do it. And another great one that kind of stuck out here was there was no formal process. So again, that's where that disconnect comes from an individual versus the nonprofit they work for, right? Like if we are just an individual trying to do these things, sometimes we can't be super successful unless we have kind of a formal organization-wide process. Okay, so those are all my survey results I'm going to share today. There is so much good information in the survey portion of the report though, so highly recommend you check all of that out. But now I definitely want to start getting to some strategies. So let's talk about ethical story collection. Okay, so when it comes to ethical story collection, usually, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to play the video today, but I will happily send it in the follow-up email. But basically, I usually like to show an example of an ethically collected story from our friends that I would rather be reading. What do we think? Do we think we might be able to watch the video, or are we okay?
Give it a try. If nothing, you can see this gorgeous little girl with her bow going back and forth, and you can see the emotion on her face. We will for sure share this out if the audio isn't playing. I'm sorry, Carly. I'm not hearing the audio on my end.
Well, that's okay, because you already hit it on the head. She was really excited to talk about her after-school program. So that video comes from our friends that I Would Rather Be Reading. They are an after-school program and now a summer program. They expanded. And they're located in Kentucky. And basically, what they do really well is when their kids are enjoying themselves, and I'm going to talk more about their actual collection process later, they capture that passion in real time. So that was just, you know, she was having a good time on that playground. She was saying, you know, I love hanging out with my friends. I love having the time to do my homework. I love doing, like being a part of this fun activity. So that's just a nice, crisp, short video that really showed how successful that program is. And we like to say that that's a great example of an ethically collected story, really for 5 reasons. And let's talk about them. So number 1, when you're thinking about collecting stories ethically, I want you to think about giving your community the microphone. So what I mean by that is that with today's technology, you really do not have to speak for others anymore. In fact, when you give your community the opportunity to speak for themselves, you're actually empowering them to tell exactly the parts of their story that they are wanting to be told, right? So it's a direct quote. It's coming really just from them. It's exactly how they would like their story to be told. My second key would be to encourage sharing where and when they are comfortable. So when you are encouraged sharing when and where they are comfortable, you're going to kind of allow for space for your storyteller to reduce their stress, and really kind of choose where they're most comfortable in the in their clothes that they prefer to be in, maybe in their outdoor setting, or maybe at their own home, in the comfort of their own home. And that's, again, where they're going to reduce their stress and really think about the things that they are truly wanting to share with you, and not feel like they're being extra pressure to share anything in particular. Number 3 would be to be upfront about how you intend to use the story. So this is a really great tip, because a storyteller might be more willing or less willing to share details based on how the story is going to be used. So we all can probably think about how, well, if I know my story is going to be shared in a grant report, or maybe at a fundraising event where it's kind of a closed fundraising event and there's only a certain amount of people there, there's only a certain amount of people that are going to have access to my story, and the only certain people are going to hear my story. So they might be willing to share more details based on the audience in the room, as opposed to if you're planning to film a video that maybe you're going to share at your gala, but you're also planning to share on social media. It's important to let them know your story is also going to be put out publicly, right? On the internet, maybe on our website, maybe really anywhere that you're planning to share their story. If you let them know up front how you intend to use it, that's going to really be the most ethical way to collect their story. Number 4 would be to use prompts with strength-based messaging. So I really challenge you to think about the questions that you're asking your community, and therefore what answers you will be getting from your community. Because when you ask a really great strength-based question, that's how you're going to get a really great strength-based answer. We'll talk more about strength-based prompts later too. And then finally, my 5th key to ethical story collection is to capture stories in real time and all year long. This is a really great key. Again, we saw the example of her being on the playground. She's having real-time excitement, real-time passion. That is sometimes something that people cannot elicit later. They have a hard time, actually showing that joy that they felt back when they were participating in your program, or when they were working with the person on your program's team, right? That's just a natural thing, right? Unless you are kind of a great actress, it's just easier if you can capture that story in real time. And when you do kind of commit to doing that and commit to telling stories all year long, you're going to avoid gaps. I know probably a lot of you, when you're setting up for your gala, or when you're getting ready to share stories at your gala, you might be thinking about clients that you worked with over a year ago. Well, what are we all remembering? Maybe there's some gaps that we're not able to remember in all of that time frame, or we might have to go back and do a lot of research to kind of remember things. But if we are capturing all year long, this is something that you can avoid. All right. So you're probably wondering, okay, that all sounds great, but how do I even get started? I am nowhere near even ready to start collecting stories. Well, I recommend that you, as an organization, create a policy for everyone to kind of get on board with, right? Because a lot of times we hear, hey, I believe in ethical storytelling, but my program staff, they don't really, not that they don't believe, but maybe they don't really understand it, or they don't really want part of their job to be collecting stories. But if you are able to create an organization-wide policy, something that I like to call an ethical storytelling standards guide, that's what's going to get everybody on board to actually start storytelling consistently. So if you do want to create a guide like this, these are the 8 things that I recommend that you start your guide with. Maybe you could even just start with 2 or 3 as you continue to grow. But some of these, I'll just quickly go over what each one of these are. So number 1, when it comes to ethical storytelling in a guide, we want to actually list out the deficit-based phrases that we're going to avoid. So if we are making a conscious language change on our website, on our social media, we want to make sure everyone on your team is aware of it. And sometimes that can be something as simple as saying, we're not using this term anymore. Number 2 would be to provide the strength-based alternatives and the replacements, right? So if we do have a great idea of, this was how we used to talk about our mission, but this is how we're going to in the future, really great to provide the alternatives for people so they feel like they are empowered to actually use that language. The third one here, mission-focused terms and phrases, actually takes that even one step further. Those are full sentences where you're saying, this is maybe the mission we're going to talk about now. This is a phrase you can actually use at your next networking event. These are things that people can actually memorize and start using in their everyday language. 4 would be to make note of any communication guidelines that might differ by channels. Where this really comes into play often is with grant writing, because people will ask, well, if the grant question has deficit-based language, is it okay if I use deficit-based language to answer that question? And you know what? That might be a necessity that you might have to do in order to qualify for that grant. I recognize that might be a requirement. So it's nice to just have that in your ethical storytelling standards guide and saying, hey, this is something that we might come across, and this is something that we are willing to use that deficit-based framing if it comes to that. Number 5 would be to show some examples of inspirational nonprofits so you have people to look to. Like I said, there's 5 in the report. There's a lot of really great nonprofits that are doing great work with changing their messaging and making it more ethical and strength-based. So definitely list those for people to check out. Next would be to include exercises that practice your new language. So actually set aside some time for your board members, your staff, your volunteers to actually start using that language so it feels natural when you are in person. Number 7 is super important, and that's a commitment to reevaluation. I mean, we know that language changes quickly. We know that people's perspectives on ethical storytelling, on our communities, on really everything about storytelling, especially like video storytelling now, everything changes so quickly. So you want to just make sure you have a commitment in your document that says, hey, after a year, we're going to relook at this, or after 2 years, we're going to relook at this. We're going to see if this all still feels relevant. And then finally, put those team signatures in there where people say, hey, I read this. I'm going to commit to doing my best to follow these guidelines, right? When people put their name to paper and say, this is something I believe in, that's really how you're going to get great buy-in. This is just a screenshot from our friends at Horizons National. They actually have a strength-based messaging guide, and this is a great example where you can see kind of the deficit-based framing, or what they wrote here, the stereotype-based communication that they used to use, and the transition that they've made to now strength-based communication. And I love that they put this out there, like they're saying, hey, we know this is what we used to do, but this isn't how we're going to all speak about our mission in the future. So they're really laying it out there and making people feel like, hey, totally fine. This is what we used to do, but hey, this is where we're going in the future, and this is what we're all going to commit to. So I just love this example. All right, let's talk about ethical story sharing. Okay, so when it comes to storytelling, we always hear, okay, you need a great emotional arc, right? You need a big transition. You need something that's going to make people really engaged in your story. So when you are writing an emotional story, these are now kind of the 4 things that I want you to remember in order to keep them more ethical, okay? Because we're all doing it, so let's just make sure that we have a few keys that we're considering while we're writing these stories. Number 1 is to consider the golden rule. So we all learned the golden rule in kindergarten or first grade, and that is to teach others the way you want to be treated. And this is honestly a really good rule for storytelling as well. Before you share a story, think about if you or your loved one were the main character, and would you like your story shown that way or written that way? If there's any reason for you to hesitate when you are reading or sharing a video and you're thinking, I don't really know if I would be comfortable with that if it was my loved one, great. That's a great gut check to say, hey, maybe we need to make a couple changes. All right, this is an important one, and that is that positive emotions are still emotions. I think that sometimes when we think about emotional stories, we think that they have to be rooted in deep sadness or deep despair. But really, I want to remind you that there's a full spectrum of emotions that will inspire audiences to give. In fact, when I think about really impactful storytelling, they are often eliciting a feeling of hope or relief. These are two huge emotions that are positive framed that actually are making donors think, hey, if my money is helping people feel hope for the future or relief that something in their life has now changed enough that they have, felt this massive relief effort, that is really something that's going to inspire me to say, hey, sounds like a great long-term solution is being done here, and I want to support that again and again. Okay, kind of similarly, but a little different. Number 3 is that big trauma is not a necessity in all stories. So we tend to think that emotionally appealing stories really have to be about a big trauma or a really serious issue. But of course, I think probably at this point, we're all at least on Instagram, maybe TikTok, and we're seeing that videos are short. Videos have little clips. They are just little snippets into people's lives. They are small glimpses into the nonprofit's work. That's me basically saying we don't actually have to have a story be as traumatic or as big or awful as we used to think it needed to be in order to connect with people. We are seeing every day people connecting with short snippets in people's lives. So when we invest into some creativity and really trust the power of how storytelling has changed over just a few years, we can now kind of remove ourselves from those big trauma moments and instead just show those small moments. And still, those are going to be really great stories that people will connect with. And finally, my 4th tip here is that to remember that words matter, even if you're not sure that you know the right ones. So quote unquote, right ones, right? What I mean by that is when you are upfront and vulnerable with your storytellers, maybe when you're interviewing them or when you're writing your prompts, and just say, hey, I'm actually not sure if this is the right term that you would like me to use to talk about your community or to talk about the way we work with your community. It could be for several. Oh, my dog likes this one. But really, whether it's because of someone's situation or their background, maybe their race or their gender, physical status, there could be a lot of reasons, right? If we are just approaching them with humility and honesty, we're actually going to build more trust with our storyteller, as well as, just remind ourselves we're all continuing to learn, right? These are terms, a lot of terms change over time, and we are all committed to learning. And as long as our intentions are good, that's okay. Okay, one quick little caveat that I want to give about ethical story sharing actually comes from the perspective of the story reader or the story consumer. So we asked, what is the best way to share stories while still being sensitive towards triggering others? So I really think that this is an aspect that's not talked enough about, which is the actual story consumer and what state of mind we're putting them in when we're sharing, especially publicly on Facebook, Instagram, the internet, where people are coming across your story organically. Maria Bryan, like I said, she's done a particularly good job at this, but she actually recommends using content warnings, and that kind of allows us to share lived experiences while supporting an individual's agency to actually consume that story. What kind of some recommended content warnings that we tend to recommend to our storytellers? I recognize every mission is totally different, so you might have different things on your list, but as a general overview, we would recommend a content warning on a public post on a email newsletter if it includes a sexual assault, domestic abuse or child abuse, animal cruelty or animal death, self-harm or suicide, eating disorders, or violence. Like I said, basically with the internet, you just never know who might be triggered by something in your story when they're just trying to go about their day-to-day scrolling, right? And there's this saying that we're all aware of, and that is, people won't remember what you say, but they will remember how you made them feel. And you really don't want to put your brand in the position where you're going to be associated with a negative trauma response for somebody that's just trying to go about their day-to-day, right? We don't want someone to feel like they need to swipe away from your story to quickly get it off their screen. That certainly isn't going to make them a donor, right? So What we want to do is we want to empower our story consumers to know, okay, I'm ready to read this story. I'm ready to be a part of this. All right, let's talk about consent now. So like I said at the top, consent is like this massive thing. It's part of all types of storytelling, the before, during, after. I mean, it's everywhere. So, you know, I tried really hard just to get this down to 4 keys to consent. Of course, it can't cover everything. So definitely download the report and read the whole section about it. But if I had to get it down to 4 keys, this is what I've boiled it down to. Number 1 is to get written or electronic consent. So what I mean by that is we're not going to just rely on verbal consent anymore. And we're definitely not going to rely on implied consent. So we don't want just a conversation that we've had with somebody to ever make it feel like we now own that story or that we can reshare that story, right? What we really need to get is some form of written consent or electronic consent in the form of maybe a checkbox when people are saying, okay, I agree to this. Sometimes when we bring this up, people will say, well, I do in-person events and we have people that come in and they're sharing stories and we're not really sure what might be okay to share later. So what I would recommend there is if you are planning to have maybe a videographer or a photographer at your event, or if you're planning to physically collect stories, maybe like with your own phone, I would recommend gathering group consent maybe up front while people are registering for the event, or when they show up that day, letting them know these are the possibilities of things that we're looking to collect. Are you okay with that? Okay, number 2, maybe after you have kind of mastered number 1, you can get to number 2, which would be to strive for informed consent. So like I said, there are great consultants doing a lot of great work about informed consent right now. So if you are ready to dive into informed consent, definitely go work with somebody. They truly, there's just really great work on that. But if you're looking just a few ways to start kind of your informed consent process, what that might look like is something as simple as walking through the consent form with your storyteller. So reading it with them, making sure if they have any questions, you actually can answer those up front. Or if you're finding that maybe your storytellers do not have the same primary language as you, or they might learn in a different format, you want to maybe offer alternative ways for them to understand consent. So that could look like a translator, that could look like a video format where people are, or an audio format where people are actually listening to the consent form. We know that people learn in different ways, right? So sometimes being able to give them another option to better understand what they're agreeing to, that's a great way to start your informed consent process. Now, number 3 would be that this concept that consent is not in perpetuity. So this is actually something pretty new to me since just creating the first report. Yeah, we have now since added a consent removal form to our website because we realized that just because someone shared their story with us at one point, it doesn't actually mean that we should have ownership of it forever. In fact, we should actually be providing a way where they can always remove their consent if at any point they decide it's not a story they would like shared publicly anymore. And also, it's a great idea to build in some sort of system where you're checking back in regularly. So what you might find is after 2 years of sharing a story, you might want to check back in and say, hey, is this still an accurate way to talk about your story? Do you have any updates for us? And is it okay to keep sharing this? And you might find that people do have some great updates to share, or they might find, this actually doesn't really represent my story anymore, and I'm not really comfortable with it. And that's okay. And then finally, number 4 is this brand new concept to me. I've been working closely with this nonprofit attorney. Her name's Carly Levine, and she first kind of made this thing that might seem obvious, really obvious to me now, which is that you really need to consider the risks when it comes to writing a consent form. So the parts of your consent form are all really about mitigating risk. So you want to make sure that you're identifying, assessing, managing, and monitoring all risks that are associated with consent, both for your storyteller as well as for your own organization. Another thing that she loves to point out, which is super, super important, is that if you are thinking that there are potential holes in your consent form or in the way that you collect consent, please consult legal counsel, especially somebody that knows your own state laws, because when it comes to story sharing or content sharing in general or story ownership, there's different considerations every state. So that is something to definitely consider. Maybe you could add someone to your board that has a legal background, or maybe we can introduce you to Allie. She's great. But yeah, that's a great thing to consider. All right, moving right along, let's talk about one of our ethical storytelling case studies. So I mentioned at the top our friends that I would rather be reading. Like I said, they are an after school and summer program for kids in Kentucky. I think they work in like 8 schools at this point. But yeah, they're growing like crazy. They have such a great success rate. But here is kind of what their problem was, which was, probably like a lot of us, when the pandemic hit, they actually found they needed to find some other fundraising sources, right? So they actually had never really done storytelling before. They had relied on different types of grants and things to run their programs. And they thought, well, we are now in a predicament where we need to start, getting some other forms of funding. So they had heard, that storytelling is a really great, successful strategy. They just had never done it before. But what they were nervous about, or maybe kind of their problem, was that they knew that the children that are a part of their program, specifically of their Educate and Elevate program, part of the program is a trauma-informed literacy support. So that means that they already knew that all of the students that qualify for this program, just by nature of being in the program, did have sensitive stories and sensitive backgrounds to their stories. So they kind of were met with this maybe classic storytelling dilemma, which definitely raise your hand if you feel like this also talks about maybe what you're feeling right now. But it's this classic dilemma of like, okay, well, how am I supposed to share impact stories without our families feeling shame or embarrassed? How do I really tell the story of my nonprofit, especially when it is rooted in maybe a trauma-informed program where we know that to qualify, you have kind of inherently sad, sensitive stories, right? So what they decided to do, they actually made an organization-wide policy where they decided they were going to do storytelling, but all of their efforts were only going to be on the progress that their students made in the program, their actual learning experiences, and their accolades. So that means that on the flip side, their storytelling prompts would only be strength-based, and they would never actually ask about the needs that their students have that were caused by their trauma. So they wouldn't actually even go there. They wouldn't get those stories because they knew they didn't want to share those stories. They knew they didn't want to put their families in that position. And the way they were going to avoid that is simply asking strength-based questions instead. So these are some prompts that I took directly from their MemoryFox account. When it came to questions that they asked students about the program, they would say, hey, what is your favorite thing that we do in Educate and Elevate? Tell me one thing you love about yourself. And tell me, what have you learned in Educate and Elevate? And then when it came to their teachers and their staff and their mentors, they would ask them, what's a story that warms your heart from the times you've been tutoring? And I love this one. When you pick up the kids, are they excited? What are some of the things they're saying? Right? Because we always hear the little chatter, right? If you've ever been like a counselor or a teacher where you've seen like all the chatter of like, what are they talking about? What are they having fun with? So they committed to this process, and they actually decided, this was what they were going to do. They had their first in-person fundraising event. It was their Hearts for Hope breakfast. I don't know if any of you do like a Hearts for Hope breakfast around Valentine's Day, but that's what they do. And they decided they found all these clips. They got all of these clips from their children. They ended up getting 50 clips, including the one that I showed at the beginning. And they took all of those and they put it into one composite video. So I know we can't share it right now, but I am going to show you in the follow-up. I have just a snippet of the video for you. It's 1.5 minutes, and really the full video is actually a bit longer, but this kind of, for clarity and length and for the actual webinar, I wanted to make sure that we just had a smaller video, but I'll definitely send it to you afterwards. But really, the video takes us through some statistics of why they started the nonprofit, why the nonprofit's important. And then it goes on to ask the children questions like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then they have the kids kind of thinking through, well, I want to be a soccer star, and I also want to be an author. And to do that, I need to be able to read. And it's like, well, of course you do, right? I mean, how sweet is that little story? It's a really great, and then they also ask questions about like, well, what's your favorite book and what did you learn from it? And they're holding up their book and they're saying, this taught me how to be kind, and this taught me how to share with others. And these are lessons that we learn from reading, right? So it's super great example of many 50 clips put together into one video that they showed at this breakfast. And of course, this was a big risk because they'd never done this before. And I think that there's sort of this misconception that if we only focus on the positives, or if we only capture positive framed content, will it really give us any funds? Will we really raise funds, right? But they actually found that just showing this one video at this one fundraising breakfast, it raised them $32,000 right in the room afterwards. And since they had never done this before, they weren't really sure what to expect, but it actually ended up being 75% more than their original goal at their fundraising event. So that's probably music to your ears, Lori. I'm sure that everybody on this call is probably like, oh my gosh, if I could get 75% more than my original goal, I mean, what a dream.
For sure. I mean, anytime you hit goal, let alone, that high over, is incredible.
Yeah.
But they planned in advance for it, obviously. They did the work.
They did, and they really thought ahead with the types of videos that they thought, the clips, putting them all together and really making them see what their students are actually doing, right? Like what they're actually learning. And yes, they could have maybe brought in some students. They could have maybe, had them stand up. But, when you're capturing the story in real time, that kid's talking about the book they just read and talking about, maybe their assignment was thinking about what they wanted to be when they grow up. And that was what they were just talking about. So, that it was just a really great example of all of the videos coming together to really show a much bigger story.
Love it.
All right, as I wrap up my time, I want to quickly talk about anonymous storytelling. Like I said, I do want to recognize that, it's not always safe or comfortable for people to be on camera, to share their stories. But I do want to say that if you feel like that is your mission, like that the stories are just so inherently sensitive that you could not ask people to share stories, or that you feel like you just have nothing that you're able to share, we do have some anonymous storytelling strategies to share as well. So in the report, there are 7 anonymous storytelling strategies listed. Today, I just want to talk about one in particular that I think really you can use at an event, or that you can use really in any fundraising capacity. And that would be to tell the story of an object. So this tip came from our friend T. Clay Buck. He said that the Agents of Good in Canada did this brilliantly when they told the story of people experiencing food insecurity through the point of view of the delivery truck. So what they did, they took a phone, they prompted it on the actual dashboard of their delivery truck facing out. So they captured the video of what that truck went through in a day. And then they talked about this, they had this great video that they sped up, they added music to, and then they talked about, well, it traveled this many miles, it needed to stop for gas, and then that gas helped us fuel this many more miles to serve this many more families. The truck needed to stop and get air in its tire, which meant that it was able to carry the boxes of food to all of the families, right? These are things that kind of, without showing any human faces, right, we're able to now say, hey, I completely understand what's going on there. I totally see that story through the story of an object. Obviously, we're not all food banks though, right? So maybe delivery truck, it doesn't resonate with you, but if you are an after-school program or a summer program, maybe you tell the story of the brown paper bag and how much nutrition it holds, and how that nutrition helps their students learn leadership skills, teamwork, really confidence, whatever your program is focused on, really just thinking about an object that kind of delivers that mission in a different way. Or maybe you are working with the unhoused population, or maybe you're building homes, and an object that might be an interesting story for you to tell might be that hammer that's doing all the work, which of course we know a human is actually maneuvering that hammer, but the hammer does have to go and hit that nail, right? So that is something that, you know, people really can understand through an object.
And to be honest with you, Carly, these are just such different ideas than seeing somebody up there in a screen, a one-on-one conversation. I think even though they're anonymous and it's because you want to anonymize things, I think these are great ideas also to diversify your storytelling.
Oh yeah, I mean, I could see, like, especially you know, with your auctions, I know I've talked about this before in a different webinar, but I mean, telling the story of the actual objects that you're auctioning off, right? Like, how is that object going to help your mission, right? What does that have to do with actually serving your mission? I mean, sometimes the objects you have in an auction might feel so disconnected, but we know that the money raised is not going to be disconnected from your mission. So I think, like, it's such a good reminder that, like, we really can personify anything and make it feel like a good part of your mission. All right. You're probably wondering how I could possibly have any key takeaways with all of this information, but I do. And I would say that if you're feeling overwhelmed by all this information, if this is the only side that you look back at later, no problem. These are 4 ways you can really get started ethical storytelling right now. So number 1, like I said at the top of the hour, craft an ethical storytelling standards guide, right? Having a policy really is going to make all of the difference in terms of your whole organization getting buy-in, even if it's just a few things on a Google Doc. Let's get it started. Number 2 is to be upfront about all of your options with your storyteller. So if you are planning to offer anonymity by removing those identifying factors, let them know you can do that. If you are planning to share on certain platforms or all of your platforms, please let them know that. In terms of time frame, how long are you wanting to share their story? When are you going to check back in and ask them again to reshare that story? Just be upfront with everyone. That's really going to reduce the stress on your storyteller. Number 3 is to always give your storyteller the final yes or final no. So I know I'm in a room of people that are putting together great fundraising events where probably several of you are putting together videos that you're sharing maybe in front of a big audience. Are you making sure that your storyteller is seeing that final cut? Are they okay with how their story has now been edited? There might be certain things that you definitely didn't mean to change in the editing process, but perhaps you did. And it's just a really, really good ethical standard to just go back and say, hey, just a final yes on this would be great. And then number 4 probably comes as no surprise, but it is just consent. If you are feeling like you are just not doing consent at all, start with a little checkbox. Start with a written form. Start with something that people just say, okay, I read it, I'm good. If you are already doing that, maybe do some of those informed consent practices. But either way, I don't want you to feel like consent is such a big, scary topic that you just don't storytell at all because of how big it might feel. And now normally I would share a really fun video here at the end. But again, I'll save this one for the follow-up email for you all. And then, okay, I'm all done. I didn't talk about MemoryFox really, about how it works or anything, but we are doing a really fun giveaway right now that has to do with the US Open. So if anybody is interested in learning about MemoryFox specifically, highly recommend you sign up for our giveaway. Basically how it's gonna work is I'm gonna match everybody with a US Open golfer, and whoever wins the tournament, you win an account. It's pretty simple. It'll be super fun. But yeah, that's all I got for you today.
That's awesome. And MemoryFox is an amazing platform so that you can collect all of these stories. So now that you have the strategies behind it, you know how to do them, hang out with Carly and her team to talk about actually turning that into a system and a process. So Carly, thank you so much. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask Carly before we hang up, happy to answer those live. If your head is buzzing, you can always reach back out to Carly afterwards. Her and the MemoryFox team are absolutely lovely and are accessible to answer your questions. They're handling stories and conversations like this all day, every day. And I know this is probably just a part of your job out there. So, you know, it's great to have experts like Carly and the team available to help navigate some of these difficult areas. So, any other last questions, last comments? Oh, thanks for dropping that in there, Carly. And then I will, of course, have the resources available afterwards on the replay for the webinars as well as the report again. Carly, anything else to add? I'll give you the last word.
Gosh, let me say that thank you for having me. This topic, if you can't tell, I'm super passionate about it. This is super important. And if you aren't, you know, thinking about ethical storytelling, that's okay. Like, it's okay that if this is the first time you've heard these concepts, like, they're just find one little thing to start doing, you know, start building. It really is a big process that you can just do incremental changes. You don't have to make some big major overhaul. There's just a lot of little changes you can make. So I am just a big fan of people who are just willing to give it a try.
Love it. Thank you. I appreciate each and every one of you for spending a little bit of your day with us. And with that, I'll close out. Thanks, Carly.